I feel like that allows for a pivot to a slightly different aspect of the game, which is obvious if you're looking for it, but it might not be obvious if you're not. And that's we have a really deep supernatural world to this, and I think this first season is designed to introduce readers to like this whole supernatural, spiritual, mystical world going on that even for Verity, she sees. So kind of to set the stage here, we enter a world where sort of like culturally it's think like superstitious. You think like ancient Greece or something where there's all the gods in the temples and Zeus is fighting with Athena or whatever else. And so you imagine this world, but also there's the cynicism that says, yeah, but none of that's real, and like it's just sort of fairy tales. But pretty quickly we start to introduce that, oh, this is far more real than I thought. So I'm curious how you just like how did you experience this kind of like this undertone that's pretty, it's not much undertone, like it's actually there pretty quickly, but working with that, was that it? I think that was a new world for all of us.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, for me, certainly, like I kind of have a history within game development stuff on other teams of people very quickly wanting to go to like, what if it's a story about demons? And what if it's a story about ghosts? And being the person in the room that's like, what if instead? And like just offering something like very different, something unexpected. Because those were topics that like I don't know, just frankly speaking, I was raised in the height of the 80s satanic panic, like
Right.
where like I was not allowed to watch Scooby-Doo or the Smurfs because the Smurfs had spells and we couldn't play Pokemon. Like there were just so many things and it was like every exploration of something spiritual could be like this portal to a demonic
Right.
like realm or possession. And so I was always very nervous about those topics. And then I was very hesitant to write about them because I think it just, it. I had a pastor once who would always say that he was way less concerned about the content of a movie, a film, a book than about what it glorified. And that I think has always stuck with me and been a really, really good lens for me to think about things through to go, oh, yeah, like you can watch a movie where everyone in it is wretched, but does it glorify their wretchedness or is it a cautionary tale? Because then those are two different movies.
Right. Right.
Um, and so I think this was a really interesting way to like kind of explore some of these spiritual topics that had been off limits to me maybe previously, just personally, and to say like, oh, actually, like, what if we do explore this idea of a very present spiritual realm, like complete with demons and angels and all of this, but we're careful about what we
Yeah.
glorify and what we don't glorify.
I'll tell you, I felt like so it was 10 years ago ish, maybe 15 years ago, where we did the Soma did its first game, maybe 2009. We did our first game was set in the same universe, right? So it's in this arc universe, and we had the steampunk thing, we had the kind of the physical backdrop, but it wasn't until really before, just shortly before we started writing this game, where we had a chance to come back to this world because we'd been doing Redwall all those years in between. We came back to the story, and by that time, I think it was probably Samantha who first said, like, what if we add in this supernatural layer that really has always been hinted at, but we just never developed? And I would say that thought, it really kicked this whole world into overdrive in a way that brought it to life, and I think a really exciting way. But it's weird territory. I'm like you, it's like I don't know how much is too far, and yet it's so fun. Like I feel like there's so much meat to play with here, and it's allowed us to think about, I think, really deeply and creatively about a world that frankly doesn't get much interest. It reminds me that there's most of my life there's been this notion like heaven, for lack of a better word, heaven, like the whole spiritual realm was super monochrome, and just sort of like wispy people with maybe halos and harps. It was just boring, um, and I think that leads to a notion where hell seems way more interesting than heaven, right? But as we started to think through this spiritual world, just give it nuance and give it texture, boy, some fun stuff came to light. And ultimately, I don't want to spoil the story, but when you think about chastity in the story, I'm like, that's one of the most interesting broken people I've ever talked or seen in the story. Like chastity is is a fascinating character, all because of this interplay of the physical and the spiritual and how she's dealing with her relationships. She's a she's a fascinating character, but also like so sad. I think so sad.
Sure, absolutely. Well, and I think it's one of those things that as humans we have a natural fascination for. And one of the things I love about this story is that I think we really tried to weave in all of the things that humans have a natural fascination for.
Yes.
So like we love a good cult doc. Cool. Like then there's some cult stuff in there. We love a good like affair or like romance scandal. So there's some of that woven in and like just all the things that naturally kind of captivate us as humans, usually because we don't understand them. Like
Yeah.
usually we watch these things and go, I don't understand. Like how could this person do that? And how could this person let it happen? And how did this person get wrapped up in it when they seemed
Yes.
like, and so I think that that kind of exploration of a spiritual realm, one that kind of fully acknowledges like there's a lot happening that we don't understand,
Yeah.
actually leads to really fascinating stories where maybe like what was more difficult for me and my upbringing was this idea that like we fully understood it. Like we understood
Right.
it. It was exactly like this or like that or like this, and this was right and this was wrong, and it was very clear. Um, and maybe it just sucked all the imagination out of that
Yeah.
sphere and anything with imagination. Like I remember I read a book about a unicorn and then was cautioned that like we don't become people that are obsessed with unicorns because they aren't real, right? Like
Yeah.
just things that were playful and imaginative and fascinating and asked the big why questions or hinted at like maybe there's more going on in the world than we perceive or understand. Like that was all something to be very suspicious of. But as soon as you open those questions back up of like, what if there's more going on than we can quite grasp? I think all the imagination comes back in ways that are really lovely if you're thoughtful about how you both like create it and consume it.
Yeah. Well, Amy, I think this has been a wonderful interview. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really excited about the writing that we got to do together, but certainly like it really was by your hand. I think it's the best story we've ever published, and one of the things that I see that you have a lot of joy into. So thank you. And by the time this releases, we'll be just probably a couple days from product release and see what people think. So thank you very much,
Awesome.
Amy.
Yes, thank you.